Hello, and welcome to the Nintendo Power Retrospectives. I'm Count Zero. This week, we have come to episode 40, and we are taking our first steps into a larger world, as we have our first SNES game and our first Star Wars game in Nintendo Power, number 28, for September of 1991. We've got 8 games this issue, so we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'll also be splitting this episode in half, because I've now got a 15-minute length limit again on my YouTube account. So, let's get started. Our cover for this issue is Super Mario World. We have Mario and Yoshi, large and in charge, with a painted cover instead of a diorama. This isn't going to be the last of our dioramas, but it would have been nice for a title this big to get one. In our letters column, we had a solicitation for suggestions for future Players Poll contest ideas in a past issue, and here we get the ones that didn't win. Now, the winning contest entry was a trip to see the American Gladiators live, plus a chance to do some of the stunts from the show and get a copy of the NES game. My personal favorite of the rejects, though, was a recommendation that they bring back the Final Fantasy Treasure Hunt. With the upcoming release of Final Fantasy II on the SNES, that actually sounds like a pretty good idea. We now have come to the first Super Nintendo game to be featured in the magazine with Super Mario World. We have a rundown of the powers Mario and Yoshi can get, along with info on the game's enemies and their tactics. Rather than giving individual level maps, we get overworld maps for each of the game's 8 areas, and brief notes on each level. No full maps, though. We may get more coverage later, but the heck with it. As of this issue, the game is out. Let's play this thing. Super Mario World is, in my opinion, the definitive Mario game. It rewards exploration in a way that the series really hadn't since Super Mario Bros. 2. It has a variety of power-ups like Super Mario Bros. 3, but not so many that you have power-ups that only feel useful in edge cases. Everything works, giving us a platformer that just runs like a well-oiled machine. You can explore pretty much everywhere in the world, and you can navigate things just perfectly if you've got, of course, the skill. In Nestor's Adventures, this time Nestor's providing a tip for Bill and Ted's Excellent Video Game Adventure. However, due to how this strip is structured, I'm not quite sure what the tip is. I'm assuming that to find Lincoln in modern San Dimas, you'll have to go to Lincoln Park. However, that's not clear. It doesn't say if you need bait to find him, or if this is just an earlier point in the game where you're gathering the historical figures. And doesn't tell you where the bait is. We move on to our first Star Wars game, thus far, with the NES adaptation of the first film. The article has a drawn overworld map of Tatooine, as well as screenshot maps of each of the sublevels before you reach Mos Eisley. Here's my problem with the NES Star Wars game, and it's a big one. It has falling damage. In action platformers, generally, falling damage is a bad idea. Falling damage gives you the time setback and annoyance of just falling, while also adding the damage factor of spikes. Basically giving you a big time setback, and also now you've taken additional damage, which makes it harder to get back to where you were in the first place. Any place where you have falling damage in a platformer, you are really better off just having spikes or bottomless pits, unless you are playing a procedurally generated roguelike style platformer like Splunky. Frankly, falling damage, in my opinion, makes the penalty for failure too high, and the annoyance factor also too high, and thus the usage of it in this game really hurts the game a lot. Otherwise, the controls are alright and the level design is interesting, which actually leads me to my other problem. It feels like when these levels were designed, the game didn't have falling damage. However, at some point, possibly while they were testing the Death Star stages, they decided that what the game needed, due to the height of those stages, was falling damage, so they decided to put it in. But when they put it in, they did not consider how this would affect the earlier levels in the game, which were designed to teach you the platforming and the controls and the running and shooting and that sort of thing. And were also designed without falling damage being present. And they didn't go back and adjust those levels accordingly, which makes sense because that's a lot of work to do. But ultimately, it hurts this game a lot, so I recommend really giving this game a miss. Next up is a guide for the NES version of Smash TV, which is designed to be played on 2 controllers, one to move and the other to shoot. We also have notes on the first 3 circuits. So, I'll give them points for originality for coming up with the 2 controller scheme. It just doesn't really work. It's clunky, it's awkward. I'm assuming what they have in mind is you're supposed to hold the controllers sideways. But it still didn't quite click for me. It's awkward and uncomfortable to use, and this gameplay footage kind of shows the problems with this scheme. There's additionally no actual good reason to own this game on the NES. Between the versions designed for consoles with twin-stick controllers like those in the Midway Arcade collection, and the fact that the Super Nintendo version of Smash TV uses the D-pad and face buttons to emulate twin-stick controls instead, you really don't have any reason to own this game on the NES. None at all. There are better versions that are more easily available and more accurate to the arcade version of the game. In the NES classified information column, we have some advice on how to heal up in the game Quantum Fighter Kabuki. Our next game is Kickmaster, an action martial arts RPG where you just attack with kicks. The article gives a list of the different type of kicks you can do, notes on the first 3 levels, and maps of levels 4, 5, and 6. It's interesting to see that basically the first quarter of the game doesn't get maps. This game was surprisingly fun. It's not without its problems, though. In particular, the angle of your standard attack kick in this game is far too steep with not enough extension. It feels like the animation is the character trying to stun their opponents with their foot funk instead of actually trying to hit them in the head. Additionally, when you defeat an enemy, instead of just getting XP or an item to boost your mana points or hit points or your score, instead 3 items are tossed out of the defeated enemy in 3 different directions, sort of an arc, and instead of lying on the ground for you to collect, they fall through the level, requiring you to scramble to get them. Theoretically, with quick jumping you can get all 3, but further, because among the items that can be dropped as a hazardous item, you have to look to see what you're collecting, costing you further time that you could use to get your item, to get the items. That said, those are really my main problems with this game. You have a very high jump angle, and you can do kick attacks in a variety of directions, which all works really well in the game. The game even gives you a variety of power-ups, which will give you special attacks against enemies or healing your health. I'd really say this is an underrated title in the NES's library. Well, not too underrated. As of this recording, a copy of this game on eBay right now will cost you about $50. And no, this didn't get a Famicom release, so you can't import it for a lower price if you have an adapter or a Retron 5.